He stood frozen in the doorway of the cafeteria, the noise of lunchtime fading into a dull hum. Trays clattered. Kids laughed. And right there, at a corner table no one seemed to notice, he saw his daughter sitting alone, shoulders tense, eyes lowered, clutching her lunch like it was the only thing holding her together. Something was very wrong. And in that moment, everything he thought he knew cracked open. Before we go any further, let me take a second to welcome you. If you're new here, this is the Black Voices, a place where real, deeply human stories are shared with care. If this kind of story matters to you, consider subscribing, tapping like, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your voice belongs here too. He hadn't planned to be there that day. The visit wasn't on his calendar. Squeezed between board meetings, investor calls, and the endless responsibilities that came with being the CEO of a fast-growing tech company. His days usually started before sunrise and ended, long after his daughter was asleep. But that morning, something nudged at him. A quiet feeling he couldn't explain. So instead of heading straight to the office, he told his assistant he'd be unavailable for a couple of hours and drove across town to the middle school. The school sat in a modest neighborhood, the kind with tree-lined streets and houses that had seen better days but were still full of life. Kids walked in clusters, backpacks bouncing, laughter spilling into the air. It looked normal, safe, exactly the kind of place he thought he'd chosen carefully when he enrolled his daughter there 2 years earlier. She was 12 now, bright, thoughtful, funny in a quiet way. And Black, he was not. Their story together hadn't started easily. Years earlier, when he and his wife made the decision to adopt, they knew they were stepping into something that would challenge them in ways love alone couldn't solve. They'd taken classes, read books, listened to panels of adult adoptees, especially Black voices who spoke honestly about identity, belonging, and the wounds that can come from being raised in families that don't fully understand your lived experience. They tried to listen. They tried to learn. They promised each other they would never pretend color didn't matter. When their daughter first came home, she was 9 years old, guarded but observant. She watched everything. How they spoke, how they touched, how they reacted when she did something wrong. Trust came slowly, but it came. At least he thought it did. That morning at the school, he signed in at the front office, the receptionist barely glancing up as she handed him a visitor badge. He told her he was just stopping by to say hello to his daughter during lunch. She smiled politely, pointed him toward the cafeteria, and went back to her computer. The hallway smelled like floor cleaner and old books. Lockers lined the walls, dented and scratched, carrying the marks of generations of kids. As he walked, he rehearsed what he'd say. A quick hug, a joke. Maybe slip her a note telling her how proud he was. Nothing big. He didn't want to embarrass her. The cafeteria doors swung open, and sound rushed at him all at once. Hundreds of voices layered over each other. The scrape of chairs. The shout of a lunch monitor telling kids to keep it down. It was chaos. Normal, everyday chaos. He scanned the room, searching for her braided hair, the purple hoodie she loved. It took a few seconds before he saw her, and when he did, his steps slowed. She wasn't with friends. She wasn't laughing or talking or trading snacks the way kids her age usually did. She was alone, sitting stiffly at the end of a table where the other seats were empty. Her lunch tray sat untouched. At first, he wondered if this was just a one-off. Maybe she'd had a disagreement with a friend. Maybe she just wanted space. But then he noticed her hands. They were clenched tight in her lap. Her shoulders were drawn up like she was bracing for something. And every few seconds, her eyes flicked up, scanning the room, then quickly back down. That was when he noticed the group of kids at the next table. Mostly white. A few of them leaned toward each other, whispering. One boy glanced in her direction, smirked, and said something that made the others laugh. Not loud enough for an adult across the room to hear, but loud enough for her. She didn't react. She just sat there, still, silent. His chest tightened. He stood there longer than he realized, watching, waiting for someone to intervene. A teacher. A lunch monitor. Anyone. No one did. Finally, he walked closer, keeping his distance, not wanting to draw attention. As he passed by, he heard it. A word dropped casually into laughter. A comment about her hair, about her skin, about how she didn't belong here. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't dramatic. It was worse. It was quiet, normalized, easy. He felt heat rise up his neck. Anger, yes, but also something sharper, guilt. At home, she rarely talked about school. When he asked how her day was, she usually shrugged and said it was fine. When he pressed, she changed the subject. He had assumed it was normal preteen behavior. He had assumed that if something serious was wrong, she would tell them. He was wrong. He watched as a girl from the nearby table walked past his daughter and deliberately bumped her shoulder, sending her water bottle rolling onto the floor. The girl didn't apologize. She didn't even look back. His daughter stared at the bottle for a moment, then slowly bent down to pick it up. Her face was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that comes from practice. That broke him. He stepped forward, ready to say something when he felt a hand on his arm. A lunch monitor, an older woman with tired eyes, shook her head slightly. Not unkindly, almost apologetically, like she was saying, let it go. He pulled his arm free. He approached the table and sat down across from his daughter. Her head snapped up, surprise flashing across her face, quickly followed by fear. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. "Just wanted to have lunch with you," he said gently, forcing his voice to stay calm. "Is that okay?" She nodded, but her eyes darted around the room. He could see the tension in her jaw. They sat in silence for a moment. He picked up a fry from her tray and smiled. "You're not eating." "Not hungry," she said. He didn't push. Instead, he leaned in slightly and spoke quietly. "I saw what just happened." Her shoulders stiffened. "Nothing happened." "Something did," he said softly. "And you don't have to pretend with me." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, without looking at him, she spoke. "It's always like this." Those 4 words landed heavy. She told him, haltingly at first, then in a rush, how it had started months ago. Little comments, jokes being left out. Teachers calling on her less, classmates touching her hair without asking. Being told she was lucky to have been adopted. Being asked if her real parents were in jail. She said she didn't tell them because she didn't want to be a problem. Because she knew they already worried about doing everything right. Because she didn't want to make them feel like they'd failed. He felt tears burn behind his eyes. He had built a company from nothing. He negotiated million-dollar deals without blinking. But sitting there, listening to his daughter explain how she'd learned to disappear at lunch, he felt powerless. "I thought if I ignored it, it would stop," she said, "or I'd get used to it." He reached across the table and took her hand. "You should never have to get used to being treated like that." The kids at the other table had gone quiet. They were watching now. A few of them looked uncomfortable. Others looked annoyed. He stood up slowly, still holding her hand. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply looked around the room and said clearly and calmly, "Everyone deserves to feel safe here, everyone." Some kids looked away. A teacher finally stepped closer. He turned back to his daughter. "Let's go." As they walked out together, he felt eyes on them. But for the first time, her shoulders relaxed just a little. They sat in the car afterward, neither of them in a hurry to leave. She stared out the window. He stared at the steering wheel. "I should have seen this," he said finally. She shook her head. "You're not here every day." "That's not an excuse," he said. "I need to do better." And he meant it. The days that followed changed everything. He didn't march in and demand punishment. He didn't threaten lawsuits. Instead, he listened. He met with the principal. He asked questions. He brought in Black educators and counselors to speak to staff. He pushed for real training, not check-the-box diversity sessions, but honest conversations about bias, microaggressions, and how harm often hides in plain sight. At home, he and his wife changed too. They made space for harder conversations. They stopped assuming silence meant okay. They sought out mentors. Black families who could speak into their daughter's life in ways they never could. Slowly, things shifted. It wasn't instant. Some days were still hard. Some comments still stung. But his daughter started sitting with other kids who looked like her. She joined an after-school club focused on social justice. She started talking more at dinner, laughing more. One night, months later, as he tucked her in, she asked him a question that stopped him cold. "Why didn't anyone stop them before you came?" He didn't have a good answer. So he told the truth. "Sometimes people don't see what doesn't affect them," he said. "And sometimes they see it and don't know how to speak up." She thought about that for a moment. Then she said, "I'm glad you saw." "So am I," he said. "Even though I wish I had seen sooner. Years from now, He would look back on that day in the cafeteria as one of the most important moments of his life. Not because he swooped in and saved the day, but because he finally understood something he'd only known in theory before. Love isn't just about providing. It's about paying attention. It's about believing people when they tell you something hurts, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. And it's about using whatever power you have, not to center yourself, but to make space for voices that are too often ignored. That little girl who once sat alone at a lunch table grew into someone who knew her worth, someone who understood that her voice mattered. Not because someone powerful spoke for her, but because someone finally listened. Stories like this remind us that kindness isn't loud. It's attentive. Change doesn't always come from grand gestures, but from moments when we choose not to look away, when we choose to sit down, to ask, to stay. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of a moment when you felt unseen or finally understood, share your thoughts in the comments. Your story matters too, and sometimes just knowing someone is listening can change everything.